It's International News Desk on Echo Television Africa. Good evening and thanks for joining. In the air of politics, Fernando Marcos Jr. sworn in as Philippines president. New Zealand declares Proud Boys the base as terrorist groups. For the first time, NATO declares China a security challenge. Israel plans election in November as parliament dissolves. And Hong Kong, 25 years under Chinese rule. Today, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son and namesake of the Philippines' late dictator, has been sworn in as the country's new president. His inauguration symbolizes a striking political comeback for one of Asia's most renowned political dynasties, 36 years after the elder Marcos was ousted and forced into exile in a popular uprising. Known as Bongong, the 64-year-old Marcos Jr. won a sporadic landslide victory in last month's presidential election, assisted by what opponents said was a years-long campaign to whitewash his family's image. He replaces Rodrigo Duterte, who obtained international notoriety for his deadly drug war and has threatened to kill suspected dealers after he leaves office. In a speech that echoes his campaign slogans of unity, the new president promised to take the country far on his watch with strategies benefiting everyone, and acknowledged the public for bringing what he called the biggest electoral mandate in the history of Philippine democracy. Marcos Jr. also praised his late father's rule but said his presidency was not about the past but a better future. The late Marcos ruled the Philippines for 2 decades from 1965, almost half of it under martial law, supporting him to spread his hold on power until his overthrow and his family's retreat into exile during the 1986 People Power Revolution. Several of Marcos' opponents were jailed, killed, or disappeared during his rule, and the family name became tantamount with cronyism, extravagance, and the disappearance of billions of dollars from state offers. The Marcos family has rejected accusations of embezzlement. Activists and survivors of the martial law era under his father protested against Marcos Jr.'s swearing in, which took place at a noon ceremony at the steps of the National Museum in Manila. More than 15,000 police, soldiers, and Coast Guard personnel were deployed across the capital to guarantee security. New Zealand's government has designated that American far-right groups, the Proud Boys and the Base, are terrorist organizations. The two groups join 18 others, including ISIS, that have been given an official terrorist designation, making it illegal in New Zealand to fund, employ, or join in the groups, and obligating authorities to take action against them. The United States groups are not recognized to be vigorous in New Zealand, although the South Pacific nation has become more attuned to threats from the far right after a white chauvinist shot and killed 51 Muslim worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques in 2019. The New Zealand massacre stirred all the white supremacists around the world, as well as a white gunman who killed 10 black people at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. The State Department in the United States only lists foreign groups as terrorist units, but last year the Proud Boys were declared a terrorist group in Canada, while the Base has formerly been stated a terrorist group in the UK, Canada, and Australia. In a 29-page explanation of the Proud Boys declaration published on Thursday, New Zealand authorities said the group's connection in the violent attack on the United States Capitol building on January 6, 2021 resulted to an act of terrorism. The statement said that while numerous fighter groups were involved, it was the Proud Boys who provoked crowds, coordinated attacks on law enforcement officers, and led other rioters to where they could break into the building. The statement said there are unlinked but ideologically affiliated chapters of the Proud Boys operating in Canada and Australia. New Zealand authorities argued that before the Capitol attack, the Proud Boys had a past of using street rallies and social media to threaten opponents and recruit young men using demonstrations of violence. It said the group had put up many smoke screens to hide its extremism. Earlier this month, the former leader of the Proud Boys, Henry Enrique Tarrio, and 4 others connected to the group were charged in the United States with seditious conspiracy for what federal prosecutors say was a coordinated attack on the Capitol. The indictment asserts that the Proud Boys colluded to compulsorily oppose the lawful transfer of presidential power. The 5 leaders are scheduled to stand trial in August in Washington, D.C.'s federal court. In making its case against the base, New Zealand authorities said a major aim of the group was to train a cadre of extremists capable of accelerationist violence. Now, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has listed China as one of its tactical priorities for the first time, saying Beijing's ambition and its coercive policies challenge the Western Bloc's interests, security, and values. On Wednesday, the alliance's new blueprint, a strategic concept PDF that lays out its priorities for the next decade, was approved at the Leaders' Summit in Spain. The document focused its toughest language towards Russia, which it describes as the most significant and direct threat to the alliance's peace and security, but said Beijing's military ambitions, its confrontational rhetoric towards Taiwan, and its increasingly close ties with Moscow pose systematic challenges. The official, turned by NATO, puts the world's biggest military alliance based on the United States Armed Forces on guard against China, which has the world's second largest economy and a speedily growing military both in numbers and in top-notch technology. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said one of the things that China is doing is seeking to undermine the rules-based international order that we adhere to, that we believe in, that we helped build. And if China's challenging it in one way or another, we will stand up to that. Western leaders are concerned that Russia's aggression in Ukraine, which China is yet to condemn, could encourage Beijing to be more confident over Taiwan. China considers Taiwan a part of its territory with no right to independent recognition as a state or representation on the world stage. Speaking at an event in Madrid that was not part of the NATO summit, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said that unless China is checked, there is a real risk that they draw the wrong idea, which results in a catastrophic miscalculation, such as invading Taiwan, referring to the self-governing island that China claims as a province. Highlighting NATO's pivot to China, the meeting of world leaders in Madrid, both inside the bloc summit and on its sidelines, included many from Asian nations. It was the first time that the leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand were invited to a NATO summit. They participated in a NATO session on new global challenges after holding a side meeting outside of the summit. Still in politics, for the 5th time in less than 4 years, Israel's parliament has voted to dissolve itself and send the country to the polls in November. Israel's foreign minister and architect of the outgoing coalition government, Yair Lapid, will become the country's caretaker prime minister just after midnight on Friday, taking over from Naftali Bennett, Israel's shortest-serving prime minister. He will be the 14th person to hold that office. New elections will be held on November 1st. The move brings an official end to a year-long experiment in which 8 parties from across Israel's political spectrum tried to find mutual ground after a period of lengthy political gridlock in which the country held 4 elections in 2 years. Still talking on politics, Hong Kong marks 25 years since it was returned to Chinese rule on July 1st. Xi Jinping, Chinese president, is anticipated to travel to the territory to the occasion, which comes 3 years after mass protests calling for democracy that led to the introduction of a sweeping national security law that critics say has decimated Hong Kong's freedom. President Xi will oversee the inauguration of former Security Chief John Lee as the territory's new leader. Lee, who started his career in the police, has promised strong governance and to address the territory's housing issues, which Beijing has pinpointed as a source of upset in one of the world's most unequal cities. And more stories on business and economy. Villagers to be displaced the 3rd time as Adani steps up mining. Ninyanada, deep in Sambabol, India, has worried about losing his home for the 3rd time in his life ever since his mud house was marked for demolition by mining officials about a year ago. The 80-year-old is a resident of remote Meharmunda hamlet in Sambalpur district in the southern Indian state of Odisha, about 4 hours drive from the capital, Bhubaneswar. He was displaced for the first time when a dam was built in the area in 1957. He and his family moved 3 kilometers, 1.8 miles away to a 2-acre plot that the government gave them where they grew paddy and vegetables. In 2005, the family was once again evicted when their land was allocated for a coal mine, the Talabira Coal Mine Block 1, and they moved to a barren plot about a kilometer, 0.62 meters away, he says. Now Deep and his family of 13 are once again facing displacement as the government intends to expand mining in the area. Now where do we go? Asked Deep, his voice shaking with age. The subterranean is not alone. Some 30 households in the hamlet of 300 people will be displaced for the third time. The villagers are part of the 1,894 families, that's 9,467 people in 6 villages who face displacement for the Talabira coal blocks 2 and 3 in the Sambalpur and Jarsguda districts. The move to step up mining comes on the heels of the early beginning of a hotter than anticipated summer, with a surge in demand loading power lines and coal stocks running low, leading to calls to dig and import more coal. But experts say that with an approximated allocated coal reserve of 1.5 million tons, India doesn't really have a coal shortage and there is no need for new coal blocks. In the shores of Africa, Togolese still vigilant over security threat in spite of state of emergency. The security threat has been increasing in Togo since the deadly attack on Togolese soldiers in mid-May, claimed by the Jamaat Nasr Islam wal Muslimin JNIM, a Mali-based alliance of Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists. With a state of security emergency in place since June and for the whole north of the country, inhabitants of the town of Dapwang have continued in a state of panic. The inhabitants of the town of Dapwang, who are also seeing an invasion of displaced people from Burkina Faso fleeing the violence, now also face the fear of attacks in Togo. The measure is planned to last 3 months in agreement with the Constitution, but can be prolonged with the authorization of the National Assembly. Akoda Ayawunda, the Minister of Communication and spokesperson for the government of Togo, the state of emergency will permit the administration, the defense and security forces to have a little more flexibility in their activities, to carry out identity checks a little more frequently, to carry out home checks, to prohibit certain activities. And as we know, the state of security emergency will lead to a weakening of individual and collective freedoms. 8 Togolese soldiers were killed and 13 others wounded in a terrorist raid in northern Togo on the night of May 10th and 11th. Some 15 attackers were killed in the attack by the Togolese military, the government said. Togolese authorities said it was the first deadly terrorist attack in Togo, where the army has been deployed for many years in the north to deal with the threat of spillover violence from jihadist groups in neighboring Burkina Faso. The United Nations Oceans Conference handles marine sustainability challenges in emerging countries. Increasing demand for fish and other seafood is speedily changing the fishing and aquaculture sector. Consumption is likely to rise, driven majorly by fast-paced growth in population. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, presented at the Oceans Conference in Lisbon on Wednesday the newest report on the fisheries sector and outlined a relatively optimistic scenario. Women Development Trust Uganda Margaret Nakato Katosi explained such an ambition was more difficult to achieve in less wealthy countries in which fisheries operate or are on a smaller scale. Any sustainability agenda has to take into consideration and has to put small-scale fishing communities at the center of conservation, and it requires to take into consideration the social, cultural, and economic components of these fishing communities so that our measures are effective. But also, we can share the equitable profits from sustaining these resources. The United Nations believes that the growth of fisheries and aquaculture is key to ending global hunger and malnutrition, but greater regulation and transformation are needed in the sector so that resources are not exhausted in the oceans, Javier de Legacy said. Still on the news, 20 people discovered dead in desert close to border with Chad. Rescuers on Wednesday said in a statement 20 people were discovered dead in the Libyan desert following a vehicle breakdown close to the border with Chad and were alleged to have died of thirst in the southeastern region of Kufra. The vehicle had come from neighboring Chad and got into some 120 kilometers, 75 miles into Libyan territory before breaking down, the statement added. The service published a video on Facebook showing decomposing bodies in the desert near a pickup truck. The sparsely populated region regularly sees summer temperatures about 40 degrees Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit. Libya was plunged into lawlessness following the 2011 uprising that toppled and killed dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and its southern borders with Chad, Niger and Sudan have become notorious for people trafficking and smuggling. Thousands of people across them every year in attempts to reach the Mediterranean coast and ultimately Europe, but many die en route, including in the harsh Sahara Desert. United Nations envoy to Democratic Republic of Congo cautions Security Council on rising security condition. Bintou Keita, the United Nations envoy to the Democratic Republic of Congo, cautions the Security Council on Wednesday against a conflagration that could get out of hand in the east of the country, where armed groups are proliferating. If the rebel movement M23 continues its well-coordinated attacks against the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, FARDC, Congolese Armed Forces, and MONUSCO with increasing conventional capabilities, the mission could find itself facing a threat that exceeds its current capabilities, she warned at a Security Council meeting. The ongoing activities of the M23 and armed groups in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo threaten to reverse the hard-won gains in security and stability in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the region, Bintou Keita added. The envoy asked for the Security Council's help in turning the tide and pushing the DRC and Rwanda to find a solution to their division. Asked at a press conference after the meeting about the regional force that many East African countries want to deploy in Eastern DRC, Bintou stressed the importance of coordination with MONUSCO and clarification of roles and responsibilities regarding the protection of civilians and respect for human rights during future operations of this new force. According to her, initial deployments of the new force were expected before the end of July in Eastern DRC, with the majority of the troops on ground scheduled for August. East African leaders agreed on June 20th to set up a regional force to try to end the conflict in Eastern DRC. A Tutsi-dominated rebellion defeated in 2013, the M23 took up arms last year in Eastern DRC, a region that has been beleaguered by violence from numerous other armed groups for closely 30 years. The resurgence of the M23 has stoked a fresh catastrophe between the DRC and Rwanda, with Kinshasa accusing Kigali of backing the rebels, which Rwanda denies. In May and June, M23 attacks took place in a harmonized manner on many axes in Rutshuru, ensuring the death of numerous civilians. Over 170,000 people have been displaced. The mineral-rich DRC is plagued by dozens of armed groups in the east, most of which are a legacy of two regional wars a quarter-century ago. And finally, ECWA International ECWA President issues a press release on the false accusation of forceful conversion of people to Christianity. Following the reports by Jama'at Nasrul Islam, JNI, on Muslim News Nigeria of forceful conversion, the Department of State Security DSS raided a house located at JMDB quarters in the Tudunwada community of Jos North local government area of Jos Plateau State, where they claimed to rescue 21 people, young people, including Almajire, who allegedly said they were forcefully brought to the house and converted to Christianity. The Evangelical Church Winning All ECWA President, Reverend Dr. Stephen Panyababa, in a press release said these reports are not only false and misleading, but deliberate effort to discredit the church and cause religious crisis. According to the president, amongst numerous ECWA units is the ECWA Discipleship Unit, established under the ECWA Church-related Ministries Department of the ECWA headquarters, with the mandate trains the less privileged in the society for capacity building, skill acquisition, Christian ethics and leadership skills, with the sole purpose of making them relevant in the society. They equip them after the training with the necessary tools. Due to lack of space at the headquarters, a private property was acquired by the office at Tudunwada residential area of Jos Plateau State for training and housing of the trainees. The trainees, before being enrolled, are expected to provide the name of their sponsors and pay a mandatory sum of 75,000 naira to cover feeding and training fees. A file also containing every person's personal document is made available. Trainees at the facility are all adults with none below the age of 18 years. As a matter of policy, they are also free to withdraw from the facility as soon as they are dissatisfied with either the policies or the conditions there. Management also have the right to withdraw a trainee when they break the rules and regulations of the facility. This unit have graduated 86 trainees from different parts of Nigeria from its creation with various skills. Prior to June 14th, the property accommodated 24 persons. The allegation came as a shock over the false allegations that came from SKP Abdurrahman Hussaini that trainees at the property are citizens that were forcefully brought for the purpose of forcing them to convert to Christianity. These allegations are completely untruthful because the trainees are of age and available to government officials for questioning, as was done recently by the DSS. It was later understood that the DSS visited the facility and interviewed the occupants, who told them they were willingly enrolled and not forced, except Abdurrahman Hussaini's brother, who opted to live with his brother Abdurrahman and were released to the DSS without excitation. What is clear in this chaos is that Abdurrahman and his brother were planted as a mole to discredit the good works of the church, where thousands of trainees have benefited and living responsibly in the society. What's more is that trainees are usually given breaks, and it's the Hussaini brothers went and came back on their own, the statement added. ECWA as an organization has a global recognition and respects the rule of law and will never have such involvement of infringing on the fundamental human rights of any Nigerian to his freedom of religion, movement and association. These are facts provided by ECWA, and other insinuations such as this are fabricated and false to destroy the good works of the church since its existence for the past 129 years. And that's our package for tonight. I leave you with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 17 says, if any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, and that is what you are. Have a good evening and remain blessed.